our guest today, someone whose activism on the part of anti-poverty work, founding a nonprofit organization whose very existence, its purpose, its mission was to create the political will to end hunger in our time, is Sam Daley-Harris, author. Sam Daley-Harris, author of a book that I read 20 years ago. The 20th anniversary edition has come out called Reclaiming Our Democracy. And I'm so excited that we could have him here today. Sam Daley-Harris. So let's go back a little bit, okay? So that everybody's very clear. And really what's going on now that so many people are talking about is people don't know what to do. And one of the things that you wrote about in a recent op-ed was that we need to reconnect to the actual activism, citizen activism, that in many ways, to be honest, and you acknowledge this as well, our political system, including our nonprofit organizations, has in many ways kept us away from. There have been so many ways that the system has actually served to make us feel like we're simply spectators, so that even when there is something we can do, we don't really believe it. That's why organizations like Results are so important. So this whole show that we're talking about today, and my conversation with Sam Daley-Harris, is about each and every one of us now getting involved. To save our democracy, to reclaim our democracy, to save our democracy. We're talking specifically here about anti-poverty because that's Sam's, Sam has been such a signature, his signature accomplishment is anti-poverty organizations that he has founded. But as we will be talking, this is not just about poverty, right, Sam? It's about everything where we now need to get involved, whether it has voter suppression, voter nullification, racial justice, all the things where in too many ways, climate issues, of course, in too many ways, I think people have been disconnected from the political process, and people like yourself are teaching us how to get reconnected, correct?
That's right. When I had written this op-ed that was a few weeks ago in the Baltimore Sun, I basically said three things were needed. One is find an organization that's committed to dissolving your powerlessness. Find the organization that's also committed to training you, giving you training. And three, find an organization that's committed to help you move out of your comfort zone. Because when you move out of your comfort zone and you do something you didn't think you could do, you see yourself in a new light. I mean, this is a distinction between transactional advocacy, sign this petition, done, transaction complete, and transformational advocacy, where as a result of your advocacy, you see yourself in a new light. And so that's really the ballpark of what people could need to do. I'm going to give you a couple of groups, but I really want to underscore, we want to find the difference between transactional advocacy, sign this petition, transaction complete, and transformational advocacy, where as a result of my advocacy, I see myself in a new light. And we're looking for groups, and I'm going to name a few right now. One's Results, which focus on global domestic poverty. Another is Citizens Climate Lobby. And I'll give you the characteristics that make me call this the transformational side, Citizens Climate Lobby. Another one is the Quaker Lobby, Friends Committee on National Legislation. And another is American Promise, focused on overturning Citizens United and a constitutional amendment. And another is Catholic Relief Services. All of these groups have chapters. They put people together so they're not operating alone. All of these groups have something like a monthly conference call. Well, pre-COVID, where everyone gets together with their chapter, now they get together on Zoom. So there's ongoing training. There's ongoing empowerment that's going on in a regular way. I want to give one story. American Promise, a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. They had their lobby days. They're a younger organization compared to some of the ones I've worked with. They had their lobby days in May, and the chapters in New Jersey, they met with 9 congressional offices and the 2 Senate offices. And one of the offices they met with was Congressman Andy Kim. Now, Congressman Andy Kim was the congressman who was on his hands and knees cleaning up the debris after the insurrection.
January 6th.
Yes, and they just asked the Smithsonian to get his blue suit to put in the Smithsonian. Well, Andy Kim was already a co-sponsor of the bill. So their goal, unlike most groups would say, well, he's a co-sponsor, I'm done. No. Their goal was to move him to be an advocate and to do things like speak at a town hall meeting. So last week, he was speaking to 60 people on Zoom about the bill that he's already a co-sponsor of, but really speaking his commitment. And this group had a 15-minute meeting before the hour that he did with the public, and they asked him if he would sign an op-ed expressing his support. So they keep pushing to the next level of, you didn't just sponsor the bill, you're not just a supporter, we're moving to advocate and leader and someday champion. And so it's that kind of action that is what we're talking about, basically.
Okay, so I really want to unpack some of this because it's really important. When Sam founded the organization called Results, they kept saying that this is to create the political will to end hunger. Now, what he's talking about right now is how to, quote unquote, create political will. So first of all, you need a legislator, you need a congressman or a senator who says that they support a particular bill. But what Sam is talking about now that's so important is that it's not enough to just say you support something. Like right now, it's kind of hip in certain circles for Congress people to say, yeah, I'm progressive. Yeah. Okay. So you said you support something, but what have you actually done? And this is where citizen pressure comes in that Sam is talking about. So what you're saying, Sam, is actually meeting with the congressman. Even if he said, I support the bill, you meet with him. One of the things I learned from your organization is to the people who are already doing what you like, say thank you. Affirm them. Give them a little love if they're doing what you like, right? Yeah, that's number one. Right. And number two, what more will you do, Congressman? What more will you do, Senator? And what you were talking about was talking to a group of citizens, and you were talking about actually penning an op-ed. Now, this business about op-ed, I have two things to ask you about what you just said. First of all, I read in your own op-ed that some organizations don't even want, and this would be called the transactional nonprofits, they don't even want their volunteers to write the op-ed because they're afraid they're going to misrepresent the issue. What Results does is it teaches people to that they become so psychologically as well as intellectually and emotionally enrolled in the topic that they write their own op-ed. So they feel ownership of the issue, which is what every American citizen should feel. So you mentioned, and we'll put the links underneath this, the organizations, you mentioned about 4 organizations that you think do this. Secondly, before we get off the topic, I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of a constitutional amendment that would overturn Citizens United. We're very clear here that the undue influence of money on our politics is the cancer underlying all the other cancers. But when I think of a constitutional amendment, to do that, I think in terms of the states, what is the bill on a federal level that you're talking about that would be towards a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United?
Well, let me just say, my expertise is more the empowerment of citizens than the details of the bill. But oversimplified, there's 2 routes to that constitutional amendment. One is it starts in the states and moves to Congress. The other is it's passed by Congress and then has to be ratified by a certain number of states.
The ERA needed to be ratified and was not ratified.
Exactly.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like the women's vote 100 years ago had to be ratified because it made it through the Congress first.
And what is that bill? And I know that that's not specifically your area, but just in case you know, what is that bill called?
That particular bill is HJ Res 1. It's not HR 1, which is another important bill. Yeah. It's HJ Res 1, HJ Resolution 1, which is the language for the constitutional amendment. It's 3 sentences long, actually, giving government entities the right to set limits on the raising and spending of funds. In other words, at the moment, elected officials can't set those limits because they'll get struck down under which Citizens United.
It's obscene.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, excellent. All right. So go on.
Yeah. So I wanted to go back to the thing you said about organizations that might say, we won't let our volunteers write letters to the editor or op-eds because they'll get it wrong and misrepresent the organization. Well, yeah, I apologize, but that's out there a lot. The groups might not say it, but they act that way. And in this particular op-ed, I was saying, I was talking about confidence boosts. And one of the groups I'd mentioned is Citizens Climate Lobby. And their volunteers last year had more than 4,000 op-eds, editorials, and letters to the editor published. And I call that 4,000 confidence boosts. And I also said they had 1,700 meetings with members of Congress or their staff last year. And I said, well, if an average of 6 attended, and it's about 6, there might be 5 in some and 8 in another, that's 10,000 confidence boosts. Because when you go into those meetings, you see yourself again as a player, not as someone on the sidelines. I mean, I think most people, they're either ignoring the news or they're watching the news and maybe cursing under their breath or rooting on people doing good things. And then they're like the petition signers and donating to campaigns. That's really important. And then there's the folks that are in there and really on the field and not on the sidelines. And so that's example of that kind of group.
Well, what people don't realize is how fun it is to make those constituent calls in person, those citizen meetings with your congressman and your senators. And even if the congressman or the senator is not there, the staff member, they know how important it is. So, what I learned from being at results conferences, et cetera, is how empowering it is to be at those meetings. And also, I want to tell you a story that I might have told you before. Many years ago, when I used to do the Sister Giant conferences and when I used to do the groups that I would bring to Washington for exactly that purpose, so that people would have the experience of citizen activism, et cetera. I think at that time we were talking about the Department of Peace legislation. So there was a young woman, and I remember she was from San Diego for some reason. I remember that. She was very pretty. She was blonde. And on Friday night, I had people get up and talk about, well, why are you here? And she got up and she was very sweet, but she said, well, I live in San Diego. And she said, I've never been involved in anything political, she said, but Marianne said that we should do this because it's important. And so I'm here. I mean, she was so sweet and she was so humble and she was so kind and she was so politically clueless, right? Then the weekend happened. People were being informed and educated about the Department of Peace legislation. The next time I saw her was on Tuesday. That was lobbying day. And I saw her in the hall of one of the office buildings, maybe Longfellow or something. And she didn't have time for me. Oh, I'm sorry, Marianne. I'd love to talk to you, but I have to go. There's an appropriations meeting over on the other side of the Capitol, like at 3:00. I got to go. Then I got to go back because we're going to meet at Congressman so-and-so's office. And then after that, there's going to be a meeting, what we're going to do about Senator so-and-so. But thanks. It was great to see you, Marianne. Bye. I thought my work was done here. My work is complete here.
In the game.
I thought she needed was somebody. It's like a plug. It's like the citizen is the lamp and the Constitution is the electricity. The house is already wired for electricity, but there are a lot of systems in our political establishment and in our nonprofit world, both of which are big businesses on a certain level, that actually conspire more than perhaps even they admit to themselves in keeping that thing from being plugged in. That's how we got to where we are, and getting our lamps plugged in is how we're gonna fix all this, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I always say civic education is pretty much history in the public schools. So we leave school, who takes us? Well, it would be the nonprofit groups that would, if there was someone who was going to educate us and get us into action. And too many of them are just not geared to do that. And that's why we need to find the ones that are. If I could tell you another story, because I was talking to some of the groups I coach or I coached in the past, and one of them is the Friends Committee, FCNL, Friends Committee on National Legislation. And they had a big House win recently on repealing the authorization for the Use of Military Force, the AUMF from 2002. And again, they form chapters. They call them advocacy teams. They have conference calls each month. And their guest speaker was Barbara Lee from California. She's the only member of Congress in 2001 who voted against the authorization for the use of military force. And she's been in the lead on the repeal. And she was on the call with the volunteers all around the country on Zoom this time because it was of COVID. And she said, I couldn't have done this without you. Talking to the FCNL volunteers. She knew they were going into those offices. She knew they were carrying the water that she can't carry all by herself. And let me tell you one other thing, because these groups that I've mentioned in climate change, AUMF, a lot of times they bump into some barriers with Republicans in particular. And so what do? And I just want to run this by you. I have groups that I coach on meeting with someone's opposed. Write these 3 things down. I know you don't support X, the climate legislation, whatever. What would it take to change your mind?
Excellent.
Number 2, could you say more about that? Number 3, why do you think that is? And it's this listening exercise. And I remember a citizen climate lobby volunteer, Jay Butera, amazing guy, who went down. He lived in Pennsylvania, but he was going to get CCL started in Miami, and he wanted to start a climate solutions caucus with Republicans. And he met with a member of Congress down there, and he said, what would it take to change your mind? He said, well, if you could get the chambers of commerce on board. So he went to Coral Gables, Miami Beach, Surfside, South Miami, Hialeah, and got the chambers of commerce on board. And he came back to him. He said, well, yeah, if you could get the mayors on board. So he went and he got Miami, Miami Beach, North Miami Beach, etc. And this member of Congress became the first and lead Republican on what was then the Climate Solutions Caucus. And, you know, everyone's got their own way to do this thing. And I'm not saying working bipartisan everyone should do. But if you're going to do it, you better be clear about what you're up against and how to make some headway.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about climate solutions as expressed by the chambers of commerce in Florida or the mayors in Florida, you're going to have some real challenges there. But as you're saying, you're going to have to talk to these people. You're going to have some conversations. The fact that one group doesn't even talk to the other, that's certainly not getting us anywhere. I want to go back to something else you said a couple minutes ago, and I totally agree with you, and that is a crisis in our public education system. We have 10 states in the United States that don't even require half a year of education in American history, American civics, or American government. If a child isn't taught what the Bill of Rights even is, then how do they grow up to be an adult horrified when they see the Bill of Rights under attack? You know, we have millions and millions of Americans who obviously are very aware of the Second Amendment, but don't seem to know too much or care too much about the other 9. Yeah. So I think, and also, you know, I felt, Sam, that the success of Hamilton, Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton, really does show, and I've seen this, and I know you've seen this too, how hungry people are. People have an instinctive understanding that American democracy matters. And people are not happy to be so disconnected. They're not happy with that feeling of disempowerment. And like you and I both talked about here, people love the feeling of power that you have walking down the halls in those office buildings. Yeah. We're going to meet with this congressperson or that senator. It's very cool.
Yeah. And what's exciting for me, I mean, it's not the fullest answer to the question, but groups like Results and FCNL and Citizens Climate Lobby have these 1-year youth cohorts. Results has, they call them now Results Fellows for 1 year, 75 every year. FCNL has their own cohort, also CCL. So there is some of this kind of lifting folks up who are 20 to 30 or somewhere in that range, and getting them empowered and getting them trained up. And quite honestly, then they start taking leadership roles. And so it's not the solution to the whole problem, but it's exciting to see these young folks get involved that way.
And you are a great, well, for those who know you and know the work of Results, you are very much a sung hero. For those who don't, you are an unsung hero. But for anybody in the area of nonprofit activism, particularly when it comes to anti-hunger and anti-poverty work, you are a star among stars and a real master teacher. You have been a great inspiration to me. And I remember reading your book, Reclaiming Our Democracy. When it first came out, I remember you and I have laughed over the years when we met. And I said, "Are you the Sam Daley-Harris?" Right? Because I just read your book. Is there anything else that you want people to know, or ways that people can find out more about your work?
Yes.
Ways you want people to get involved? What would you like people to know?
I would love to just take a moment and talk about how I got started.
Okay.
Briefly.
Great.
I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in music.
Right.
And I played
remember that.
percussion instruments in the Miami Philharmonic Orchestra. And 41 years ago, I started Results, the anti-poverty lobby. And so a lot of times it's kind of mind-bending. Where does that come about? And just very briefly, I lost a dear friend. I learned at the time of high school graduation, he passed away. He was a year younger. And then 4 years later, at the time of college graduation, Robert Kennedy was assassinated. So I was 64 and 68. And those deaths got me to asking the questions of purpose. Why am I here? What am I here to do? What's my purpose? I didn't have any answers, but I had the question kind of thing. And it took me a long time, but 9 years later, I got involved in ending world hunger. And what I did in 1978 and 79 is I spoke to 7,000 high school students, classroom by classroom, on ending world hunger. And before I went into the first classroom, I read quotes from the U.S. National Academy of Sciences and others, experts, calling for the political will to end hunger. And I asked 7,000 high school students, what's the name of your member of Congress? I don't want to know if you wrote him. I don't want to know if you met him. Just the name. Out of 7,000 asked, fewer than 3%, 200, could tell me the answer. More than 97%, 6,800, did not know the name of their member of Congress. Out of the 7,000 asked, fewer than 3% could answer correctly, 200. More than 6,800, over 97%, couldn't tell me what the name of their member of Congress was. And results grew out of this gap between the calls for the political will to end hunger on the one hand, and the lack of basic information on who represented us in Washington on the other. And so I just want people to know you can have all kinds of very basic beginnings like music. You don't need some special training. Just find a group that will train you, like Results, focused on global and domestic poverty, Citizens Climate Lobby on climate change, FCNL, the Quaker Lobby, largely on peace issues and other key issues, American Promise on overturning Citizens United, and Catholic Relief Services on global poverty issues. And my own work you can find at civiccourage.org. And so my coaching mostly and speaking is done through civiccourage.org is my website address. And
two things that you just said. One has to do with this development of the myth of the political experts. The way this country was founded, the power is supposed to be in the hands of the people. That's the Jeffersonian ideal. He said that the only safe repository for power is in the hands of the people. Obviously, we know that there was a limitation to what he meant by the people. But the ideal of the universality of power in the hands of the people is undercut by this idea that, people who are into politics are handling that. I'm an artist. I'm a scientist. I'm a business person. People who are into politics will handle that. And we can see now the consequences, the terrible consequences that have resulted from that abdication of our citizen power. That's number one. Number two is a story of my own. Several years ago, it was in one of my talks, and a young woman was talking about a climate issue that she was so involved with. And she was extremely articulate. She knew exactly what the issue was. The more I asked her about it, this woman really knew what was going on. She knew what the problem was, and she knew what the answer needed to be. When I then asked her, who is your congressperson? She not only didn't have a clue, she wasn't quite sure what I was asking, and she said a name. I said, no, that's your state rep. And I thought, oh, wow, we're really in trouble here. Because this woman does know all the facts. She is involved, but there's a complete disconnection between her understanding of the issue and political activism.
Yeah. There's this great quote by Apollo astronaut Rusty Schweikert, who said, "We aren't passengers on Spaceship Earth. We're the crew. We aren't residents on this planet. We're citizens. And the difference in both cases is responsibility." And I used to say in the 80s, when we were really getting going finally in results, we used to get up out of our passenger seats and walk up to the cockpit and notice there's nobody up there. And we needed to really speak up so that we could get the leadership we wanted.
Well, we've been trained more as consumers than as citizens, as we all know. Sam, I think you're fantastic. I thought you were fantastic 20 years ago. I still do. Thank you so much for talking to me today. For everybody, remember, you can go to civiccourage.org, find out more about the work of Sam Daley-Harris. The links, the organizations that he talked about, we have beneath for you to get involved in. And I think one of the things I've learned from Sam, and tell me if I'm right, Sam, just start somewhere.
Yes, but find someone who's committed, a group that's committed to empowering and training you.
Yeah. And don't forget, everybody, we will have congressional elections in 2022. That's coming up. Great candidates are already working on their campaigns for their primaries. Please go to candidatesummit.com and you'll find out some good ones there. I love you, Sam. Please give my very best to your family. It's wonderful going through the years with you. And I hope that you do feel some great satisfaction with some of the progressive moves in the area of poverty that Biden is trying to make. And I hope you realize how many of us know how much of that is due to you.
Thank you. Love you.
God bless you, darling. All my best.